I'm Colin Maynard, 38, former Army cyber commander, now just the son who didn't choose the family business. At my brother's big day, Dad stood on stage, smiled, and said, "Colin?" Still somewhere polishing boots, I suppose. The room laughed. They didn't know I'd led missions to stop national-level attacks, while my family left my name off the guest list. But they weren't ready for what happened when his boss stood up, cleared his throat, and asked for the mic. "If this hits home, tell me where you're listening from. I know I'm not the only one who's ever been left off the list." I hadn't seen that chipped blue mug in years. The last time, it sat on my mother's kitchen counter next to a lukewarm coffee pot and a plate of overcooked toast. Back then, it was her silent way of saying, "I remember what you like." And now somehow she remembered again. That morning, the mail slid under my apartment door with the usual whisper of paper on hardwood. Electric bill, a flyer from the diner down the block, and then one envelope heavier than the rest. Cream-colored, embossed, too thick for junk, too formal for anything casual. I sat with it for a few minutes before opening it. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the fridge and the ticking clock above the stove, the one I never bothered to fix after it started losing time. The envelope read, "Maynard and Company, Executive Recognition Ceremony. Honoring Brandon Maynard, Chief Financial Officer, you are cordially invited." No "Dear Colin," no signature, just company letterhead, time, place, and the implication that I was a guest, like everyone else. I leaned back in my chair. Brandon had made CFO. Of course he had. He always had the voice for leadership. Smooth, confident, inherited from our father. He'd always known how to fill a room. I used to fill quiet. I used to fill silence. I turned the invitation over. Nothing personal, just a line at the bottom. Formal attire requested, reception to follow. The coffee in my cup had gone cold. I didn't bother reheating it. Instead, I walked to the bookshelf by the window, past my NATO commendation framed but unhung, past the bookshelf stacked with books I read more out of duty than interest, and opened a drawer I hadn't touched in a while. The photo was there. Me in my West Point uniform, squinting into the Virginia sun, a handshake from a general captured mid-motion. My phone buzzed. "Mom." I didn't pick up at first, then I did. "Willie," she said. No one else called me that anymore. "I wasn't sure if you'd gotten the invitation." "I did," I said. My voice sounded flatter than I meant. There was a pause. Then, "It'd mean a lot if you showed up." For me. I didn't ask why Brandon hadn't called me himself. I already knew. This wasn't about me. It never was. But my mom, she still set that mug out for me when I came home. She still called. She still remembered. "I'll be there," I said. "You don't have to dress up," she added quickly. "Just come." But I already knew what I was going to wear. The closet in my bedroom held 2 suits, one charcoal gray and barely used, and one uniform, dress blues, with creases pressed in and ribbons set precisely. I hadn't worn it in a while. Not since the NATO event that no one in my family came to. I pulled it out gently, laid it across the bed. The room stayed silent as I smoothed the fabric. The sun angled through the blinds, slicing the bed into stripes of light and shadow. I brushed a bit of lint off the lapel. My rank insignia caught the light, a soft glint that faded as quickly as it appeared. I didn't put it on. Not yet. But I looked at it the way a man looks at something that once meant everything, and now meant something different. Not glory, not pride, just identity. A reminder of who I had to become when being a son wasn't enough. My fingers brushed over the hem. That uniform had walked into meetings most civilians couldn't imagine. It had stood in server rooms, humming with the weight of national secrets. It had seen me through deployments, promotions, and nights when I forgot what silence sounded like. But it had never stood in front of my family without being diminished to a costume. Still, I folded it carefully, laid it out on the bed like I used to lay out field gear before a mission. Measured, methodical, respectful. I wasn't going to the ceremony to be seen. I was going because my mother asked. Because in a family where silence was currency, she was the only one who ever spent hers gently. There's a certain ache in showing up for people who stopped showing up for you, but sometimes the ache is the only proof you're still trying. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the uniform, hands resting on my knees. Somewhere across town, Brandon was probably rehearsing his speech, checking lighting, adjusting the mic to catch just the right tone. He'd earned his spotlight. I didn't resent that. What I resented was how easily I'd been edited out of the frame. Not erased, just faded. There are things medals can't fix, like being forgotten by the people you once saluted every Sunday at dinner. And so, I laid the uniform on the bed, knowing it wouldn't be enough to get me seen. But I'd wear it anyway. The mug was there, sitting on the kitchen counter like a memory that refused to fade. Chipped, slightly stained near the lip, but unmistakably mine. My mother always left it out when I visited, whether she expected me or not. That day, it greeted me before she did. The house hadn't changed much. The paint was newer, the furniture a touch more expensive, but the bones were the same. Arched hallways, high ceilings, quiet corners that held their breath too long. The air smelled like lemon polish and something I couldn't name, like time folded into wood. Mom opened the front door before I rang the bell. Her eyes crinkled, her smile tentative. She wore a soft green cardigan, and her hair was pulled back, like always. Neat, but never severe. "Willie," she said, stepping aside. I nodded. "Hey, Mom." She reached for a hug, brief, then let go too quickly. "I wasn't sure you'd come this early. You want some coffee?" "No, thanks." I had some on the road. But the mug was already waiting, blue and loyal. We stood in the kitchen for a minute, the silence thick but not heavy. Just familiar. She stirred a cup for herself. The spoon clinked against ceramic, rhythmic, soft. "He's been rehearsing his speech all week," she said finally, without naming him. "Brandon. He's nervous, though he'd never admit it." I nodded again. "Big day." She smiled. "Big enough." There was a beat of stillness before the sound of polished shoes on tile announced another presence. My father. Victor Maynard entered like he always did, upright, calculated, the room adjusting to him instead of the other way around. Gray suit, no tie, cuffs just sharp enough to suggest he hadn't been working, just overseeing. He didn't offer a smile, just looked at me and said, "Still playing soldier?" I didn't answer right away. My hands were in my pockets. My stance didn't shift. "Still serving," I said, voice even. He sniffed, turned toward the fridge. "Well, some people are loyal to uniforms, others to legacy." Mom shot him a quick glance, but she didn't say anything. That was always the rule. Keep it quiet, keep it moving. Victor poured himself a glass of something cold, took a sip, and left the room like a breeze that had never planned to stay long. I stood there, watching the space he left behind. "He's under a lot of pressure," Mom offered gently. "He always is," I said. I let her fill the silence with talk about table settings and hors d'oeuvres. I didn't hear much of it. My eyes drifted to the living room, where photos lined the walls and shelves. Brandon at graduation. Brandon on the cover of a finance magazine. Brandon and Dad shaking hands at a boardroom conference. No Colin. Not one. Not the West Point photo. Not a ceremony. not even a blurry snapshot of a visit. It wasn't anger that filled me, just confirmation. Brandon arrived 2 hours later, phone in hand, blazer thrown over one shoulder. He smelled like expensive cologne and confidence. He grinned as he saw me. "Colin," he said, voice light, like nothing had passed between us. "Glad you made it." We shook hands. His was firm but brief, a politician's handshake. "You find your room okay?" he asked. "I didn't know I had one." He laughed. "Yeah, Mom said we should put you upstairs. Used to be your old one, right? The one with the green walls?" "They're beige now," I said. He chuckled again, adjusted his cuff. "Well, still, welcome back. You'll be at table 19, I think. Extended family." I paused. "Extended?" He looked at his phone. "Yeah, logistics or something. I didn't do the seating. Talk to Mom." I didn't. Later that afternoon, I wandered the house alone. Past the study, the back porch, the dining hall with the large centerpiece already in place. The house echoed softly with preparations, footsteps, distant laughter from the kitchen staff, classical music bleeding faintly from a Bluetooth speaker. I found the seating cards lined up on a marble table near the entry. Crisp, white with gold trim. I thumbed through until I found it. Colin Maynard, table 19, extended family. Not son, not guest of honor's brother, just extended. I stared at it for a moment. My name looked strange printed that way, as if I'd been invited to someone else's event, not my own family's milestone. I slipped the card into my pocket. Not out of sentiment, just so no one else would see it. The sunlight shifted through the front windows. Dust hung in the air like hesitation. I sat on a bench in the hallway, next to a potted fern that had outlived at least 2 housekeepers. Sometimes being forgotten is more painful than being rejected. Rejection means you still mattered enough to be pushed away. Being forgotten? It means they stopped trying to hurt you. That night, I stood by the guest room window and looked out over the lawn. The garden lights glowed soft in the hedges. I wondered if Brandon knew I used to sneak out that window when we were kids, running through the trees behind the fence. I wondered if he remembered anything about me at all. The rehearsal buzzed with names I hadn't heard in over a decade. Executives, board members, family friends I hadn't seen since Brandon's high school graduation. None of them were mine. They moved through the backstage area with a kind of slick confidence I never learned. Laughter, wine glasses, white-gloved assistants with clipboards. The Maynard brand had grown, matured, polished itself. But under the gloss, it all still smelled like stage lighting and control. I showed up early, old habit. In the military, you're late if you're on time. Here, I was invisible no matter what hour I walked in. The staff coordinator spotted me and waved me over with the kind of cheer that felt too choreographed. "Ah, Mr. Maynard. You're early, that's fine. We're still setting up." I nodded. Thought I'd get out of the house a bit. She smiled, polite but tight. "Understood. Just so you know, tomorrow's dress code is formal, but we're asking family members not to wear military attire. We don't want to confuse the media coverage." I looked at her for a second. Not angry, just tired. "I wasn't planning on bringing a tank." She blinked, then laughed a little too hard. Of course. I stepped aside. Behind the curtain, the tech team adjusted mic levels and lighting angles. There were paper cups of coffee left on tall stools, cords taped to the floor, and a man rehearsing his speech into a mirror with a hand gesture that made me think of a senator rather than a sibling. Brandon. He hadn't seen me yet, and I wasn't planning to interrupt. A young woman with a tablet walked by, whispering into an earpiece. "Where's Harold's seat going to be? Stage left or front center?" The assistant beside her shrugged. "He prefers back left, Always does. I knew who they meant. Harold Pennington, chairman of the board, my father's boss. I'd met Harold once, years ago. A quiet man with sharp eyes who said very little but noticed everything. "Excuse me," another coordinator interrupted my thoughts. "We're doing family instructions now. Would you mind stepping off to the side?" "Sure," I said, even though I was family. I stepped behind a rolling equipment cart, just far enough that I could see them forming small groups. Someone laughed. My father appeared, gesturing with authority, correcting a seating order. A photographer asked Brandon to move slightly to the left. "You're the face," she said. I wasn't sure who the spine was, or if we needed one. Someone dropped a metal mic stand. The sound clanged like a bell, sharp and hollow. Everyone turned. No one saw me, except Harold. He was near the entrance to the hallway, hands behind his back. He met my eyes, nodded once. Small, precise. Then he walked away without a word. That was the kind of recognition I'd come to expect from men like him. Not applause, not introductions, just a glance that said, "I know who you are. They just don't yet." "Hey," a voice said behind me. A junior tech assistant, maybe 20, struggling to carry a lighting panel nearly the size of his torso. I stepped forward. "Need a hand?" He looked relieved. "Yeah, thanks. They want this backstage near the scaffolding. I think I have 4 arms." I lifted one end, let him lead the way. The equipment was heavy but familiar. Weight I knew how to carry. When we finished, he nodded. "You work here?" "Something like that," I said, not smiling. He laughed awkwardly. "Right. Cool. Thanks again." I stood there for a second, watching him hurry back toward his clipboard and the voices shouting from the side of the stage. Behind me, I heard it. "Is he with valet?" A woman's voice. Maybe an executive's wife. Maybe just someone who knew what mattered here and what didn't. Someone else answered. "No idea. Probably staff." I didn't turn. I didn't correct them. What would I say? "No, I'm the one who reads national threat briefings while your husband argues over seafood costs for this gala. No, I'm the one who holds access codes and black budget allocations you'll never see on paper. No, I'm just their son." Instead, I walked back to the side of the room and watched as my brother adjusted his lapel in the mirror, then winked at himself. The thing about dignity is, it doesn't speak unless it has to. It doesn't wear loud colors. It doesn't interrupt. Dignity waits. And in that room full of glass smiles and curated poses, I stood quietly, knowing my moment wasn't coming with a spotlight or applause. But it would come. Harold looked at me again as he exited, the door closing slowly behind him. He remembered. He was waiting. Brandon's name echoed through the speakers like it belonged there. Smooth, full, confidently repeated as if the walls themselves had rehearsed it. Mine? It never even left the envelope. I stood near the back of the event hall, behind the last row of chairs, one hand resting loosely in my pocket. My name wasn't on any place card. I never looked for one. Not after table 19. The room glittered. Champagne flutes clinked softly as servers in black vests floated between tables. Brandon stood under a soft spotlight, shaking hands with board members, smiling into cameras like he was born for it. Maybe he was. A live saxophone played near the floral display. It felt less like a celebration, and more like a carefully built illusion. Each detail rehearsed, every light filtered to flatter, every word measured to preserve the image. Elaine sat near the front, hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her smile was polite, tight at the corners, the kind she wore during holidays when Victor started one of his speeches. Harold Pennington sat farther back, silent, a man with the presence of someone who could break the entire room's rhythm with a word, but hadn't yet. Brandon's speech was what you'd expect. Honored, grateful, blessed to stand on the shoulders of giants. His voice hit every inflection perfectly. When he mentioned our father, the applause swelled naturally, like someone had cued it. Maybe someone had. When he was done, Victor rose from his table, walked up to the stage like it was his by default. The crowd stilled. He didn't need notes. He never did. Brandon, he began, voice rich and rehearsed, is a man who represents what this company and this family stand for: drive, precision, forward thinking. He's not just our CFO, he's the future. Applause again. Victor continued, his tone loosening as he looked around. You know, raising two sons, I always knew one of them would lead. I felt eyes shift. Just a little. Not many. He smiled wider. Brandon was always the strategic one, the thinker, the one who understood markets before he understood multiplication tables. Laughter. Warm, clean laughter. And the other? He said, pausing just enough for timing. Well, Colin? He took a different path. Still somewhere polishing boots, I suppose. The room chuckled. Not all at once, but enough. Elaine flinched. Subtle, almost imperceptible. She didn't look at me. I wasn't sure she could. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I didn't feel the heat rise or the shame twist. I just existed. Quiet. Solid. Like furniture that didn't match the decor anymore. Victor kept going, but I stopped hearing him. In the military, they teach you to stand still even when the storm is inside you, not because it doesn't matter, but because falling apart publicly makes it harder to rebuild privately. So I stood. Still. Brandon laughed at something Victor said. Cameras flashed. Champagne poured again. I looked around, not for validation, not even for acknowledgement, but for a door, just one exit. Somewhere I could go and not hear my name treated like a misplaced footnote. I stepped back toward the edge of the room. No one stopped me. No one saw me go. That's the thing about being erased. You don't make noise when you disappear. And just as I reached the side corridor, I heard a voice. Not loud, but firm. May I have the microphone? The crowd stilled. Even the saxophone stopped. Harold Pennington had stood up. There was no music when Harold stood up. Just the scrape of his chair against the polished floor and the faint intake of breath from 100 people who thought the ceremony had reached its peak. Then, quiet. The kind of silence that doesn't happen by accident. He didn't clear his throat, didn't raise his voice. He simply said, "Before we close, I'd like to acknowledge someone." The heads turned, some reluctantly, others out of habit. Brandon blinked from his spot near the podium. Victor looked confused, briefly, then put on the kind of smile that hadn't been real in years. "I don't usually interrupt a celebration," Harold continued, "but I've learned that sometimes silence says more than it should." He didn't look at me. Not yet. "I've had the privilege of working with many brilliant minds throughout my career," he said, "but only a few have impacted national security at the level of the man I'm about to introduce." That's when people started shifting in their seats. I heard whispers, light, half-formed, flicker from table to table. Then he turned toward me. "Major General Colin Maynard," Harold said clearly with no theatrics. "United States Army, Cyber Defense Command." My name, spoken that way, did something the applause hadn't. It landed. For a second, no one clapped. They just looked. Then the cameras swung, like birds, spotting a new direction in the wind. Flashes sparked. People leaned forward. A few gasped, quiet but real. I didn't stand. I didn't smile. I simply nodded. Harold went on. General Maynard led the cyber strategy team that protected critical infrastructure during last year's foreign threat operation. He advised NATO on next-generation encryption protocols. And, he paused, just briefly, he's been doing this while staying invisible to the people who should have known better. Somewhere to my left, a glass clicked too loudly against its coaster. Brandon was frozen in place, hands stiff at his sides. Victor shifted. His jaw clenched once, then released. Harold looked at me again. A nation trusted him, he said. Maybe now, so should we. Then he sat down. There wasn't thunderous applause, just a kind of murmuring reverence, the kind that doesn't celebrate, it re-evaluates. Someone at a nearby table muttered, "Wait, that's the Colin Maynard?" A woman in pearls looked down at the program, as if it might explain what she'd missed. Victor didn't say anything. "Brandon?" He walked off the stage, stiff-backed, vanished into the side wing like someone realizing they'd been cast in the wrong role. I stood where I was, hands still in my pockets. I didn't need to speak. Harold had said enough. And truthfully, there's a difference between being introduced and being seen. For years, I'd let my absence fill the spaces where their approval should have been. Now, for a moment, I wasn't filling space, I was shaping it. I looked toward the photo backdrop, where families and awardees lined up for pictures. My mother stood nearby, holding her purse like a shield. She gave me the smallest nod. Not one of pride, one of recognition. Brandon never returned for the group photo. Neither did my father. The eggs were warm, the house was cold. The sunlight through the kitchen window had that soft, golden quality only spring mornings seemed to carry. It touched the edge of the white linen tablecloth, caught the curve of the porcelain butter dish, and made everything look more peaceful than it felt. Elaine had made breakfast. Scrambled eggs, toast slightly too pale, fruit slices arranged like she was expecting company, not family. Victor sat at the head of the table, reading the financial section of the Sunday paper, like it hadn't changed format since the 90s. His coffee sat in a stoneware mug, steam curling upward into the still air. He hadn't said a word since I walked in. Elaine tried. "I didn't have time to get fresh berries," she said softly, reaching for the orange juice. "But I thought the melon looked good this week." I nodded. "Looks fine?" Victor turned a page. I cut into the eggs. The fork scraped lightly against the plate. I chewed slowly, waiting for something to shift, to rise, to snap. It didn't. Finally, I set the fork down. "Did I embarrass you?" I asked, keeping my voice even. "Or just surprise you?" Victor didn't look up. "You should have told me." "I did. Twice. Once after West Point, once before NATO." He sipped his coffee. "You just didn't read the invitations," I added. He folded the paper slowly, as if giving himself time to decide what version of himself he wanted to be in this conversation. "You chose obscurity," he said. "You had the Maynard name. The doors were open. You closed them." I leaned back in the chair. The wood creaked beneath me. I chose something that mattered to me. I chose integrity. He met my eyes for the first time that morning. Don't mistake self-righteousness for virtue. And don't mistake wealth for wisdom, I said quietly. Elaine shifted in her seat. She reached for her napkin, folded it smaller then smaller again. Victor set down his coffee cup. "You walked away from your family, from the business, from everything we built." I paused. Number I walked away from your version of it. The room felt smaller after that. He stood, picked up his mug, and carried it to the sink. "You made your choice," he said, back turned. "Just don't expect applause for it." I stood too, slower. I didn't ask for applause, just acknowledgement. He didn't answer, just rinsed his mug and left the kitchen. Elaine sat there a moment longer. She offered a faint smile, apologetic, maternal, tired. "He's proud in strange ways," she said. "I know," I said. "So am I." She looked down at her folded napkin. "He wanted you there, you know. At least part of him did." "If that part ever sends an email," I said, "I'll reply." I helped clear the plates, even though she told me not to. The act felt more like closure than courtesy. That afternoon, back in the guest room, I sat by the window and watched the gardener trim hedges that didn't need trimming. Routine, I guessed, was its own kind of therapy. My phone buzzed on the dresser. One new email. From Brandon. Subject: Coffee body. Tomorrow? Just us. Sometimes silence is safer than the truth. But eventually, silence becomes its own answer. We used to sit here sharing fries and soda. Now we shared 30 feet of space between us. The diner hadn't changed. Same cracked vinyl booths, same laminated menus curling at the corners. The same waitress, I thought. Though maybe that was just the memory playing tricks. Rain tapped lightly against the windows, soft and steady, the kind that makes everything feel slower. The booths smelled faintly of syrup and bleach. My coffee came lukewarm, just like always. Brandon was already there when I arrived, seated at the far side of the booth, our old booth, the one we used to race to after Little League practice, back when Mom still ordered for both of us. He looked up as I approached. No smile, just a slight lift of the chin. "Hey," he said. I slid in across from him. "Hey." The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was full of things we hadn't said, years we hadn't touched. He stirred his coffee without sipping it. The spoon clinked too often. "I didn't expect Harold to do that," he said finally. "At the ceremony." "I didn't expect to be invited," I replied. He winced, but didn't argue. There was a pause before he said, "I made the table 19 decision. I shouldn't have." I didn't nod. I didn't shake my head either. He reached for a napkin, twisted it tight, then let it go. "Dad always made it sound like you left us, like you chose something smaller." "I did," I said. "Smaller by your standards." He met my eyes. I believed him, for a long time. I leaned back. The seat squeaked under me. "Why now?" Brandon looked out the window. The rain hadn't let up. "Because when Harold said your name, I realized I'd never really said it out loud with respect, not in years." The waitress came by. He ordered pancakes. I passed. When she left, he took a breath. "We're running a review of our financial wing. Some numbers don't make sense. I trusted a guy I shouldn't have." I didn't say anything. Brandon reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded spreadsheet, creased, coffee-stained, annotated with red pen. He slid it across the table. "I don't want you to fix it. I want you to tell me if I'm blind to something." I looked at the paper, but didn't touch it. "Why me?" "Because you're the only one in the family who doesn't benefit from lying to me." That landed harder than he probably realized. "I don't owe you," he added, "but I trust you." I looked up at him. "Trust takes time." "I've got time," he said. "What I don't have is clarity." I took the papers, unfolded them slowly. He didn't watch me read. He stared at the pancakes when they arrived, cut them without tasting them. The numbers weren't disastrous, but they were messy, just like the relationships that had been layered around them. I closed the file. "I'll look deeper tonight." Brandon nodded. "Thanks." I sipped my coffee. It had gone cold again. Some things hadn't changed. He pushed his plate aside. "Colin," he said, "for what it's worth, I was wrong. About a lot." I didn't respond right away. Then I said, "I'm not here to collect apologies. I'm here to keep things honest." He smiled, just barely. "Then this time I won't ignore your warning." We left the booth a few minutes later. No hug, no handshake, just a pause by the door. Forgiveness isn't loud. Sometimes it's just not walking away when you could. Mom's handwriting looked the same. Her words didn't. It was the morning I was packing to head back. Rain whispered against the window panes, steady, soft. The kind of rain that didn't ask for attention, just stayed present. Like her, the room looked smaller than I remembered. The bed creaked louder. The desk sat lower, and the posters I'd once tacked to the wall had been replaced with framed photos of Brandon's milestones. But the drawer was still there. Third one down, right side of the desk, stuck slightly if you pulled too fast. I opened it slowly. Inside, among some old receipts, a yellowed church program, and a fountain pen with a cracked cap, sat a folded envelope. My name on the front. Just Colin, no rank. No Willie either. Just me. I unfolded it carefully, like it might flake into pieces if I moved too fast. You never needed our pride, but you deserved it. That was the first line. Simple, clean, and it cut cleaner than anything my father had ever said. She went on. I didn't always understand the path you chose, but I saw the way you walked it. Quiet, steady, and with more strength than your father or I ever knew how to name. I kept your West Point photo in my Bible. I didn't hang it, not because I wasn't proud, but because it felt too sacred to put next to magazine covers and boardroom plaques. I stopped reading there for a second. Let the words settle. Let the room be still. The rain kept tapping the window. She'd never told me that, never hinted. In all the years of Sunday calls and birthday cards and "we miss you" messages, she'd never said it. But she'd written it. And somehow, that meant more. I hope you find what you're looking for, Colin. And when you do, I hope you still let yourself come home. I folded the letter and slipped it back into the envelope. Not to hide it, but to keep it safe. Some words aren't meant to be left out in the open too long. I finished packing, uniform carefully folded, laptop case zipped. The smell of the house felt different now. Less like a museum, more like a memory I could carry. Just as I zipped up my bag, the phone rang. Not the house phone. Mine. Harold. Colin, he said, voice as steady as ever. I've been asked to lead a civilian cybersecurity review panel, national scope, and I need someone who's done more than just sit in boardrooms. I let the silence hang a moment. You'd be perfect, he added. Is it political? I asked. Not unless you make it, he replied. I smiled. All right, I'm in. Good, he said. We start in 2 weeks. This wasn't a favor. It wasn't a rescue. It was an invitation, on my terms. Something I hadn't felt in a long time. That night I sat back in my old room for the last time. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. The silence was thicker now. Not cold, just full. I opened my laptop. One new message. From Dad. The numbers didn't yell. They whispered, soft enough that most people could pretend not to hear them. But I did. The rain hadn't stopped since I got back to Arlington. It tapped against my window like it was rehearsing something. The kind of steady rhythm that made you notice everything else. The fridge hum, the old desk lamp flickering, the breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The file Harold sent was thick. Digitally, sure, but dense in the kind of way that made your eyes narrow and your pulse slow. Nothing glaring, just shadows where there should have been light. Line items that rounded too cleanly. Project notes that didn't line up with spend. I scrolled through slowly, one page at a time, taking notes on a legal pad, the way I always had. Something about pen on paper still felt more honest than typing. Maybe because you couldn't backspace a bad instinct. Brandon had said it was already fixed. But fixed isn't the same as right. And this didn't feel right. Midway through page 47, I found a consulting fee labeled Specialized Infrastructure Optimization. A big title for a vague job. No firm name, no deliverables, just 6 figures that slipped in right before quarter close. I clicked through the rest of the spreadsheet like a surgeon feeling for soft tissue, something out of place. And I found it. 3 more entries. Different names, same style, same signature code. I sat back, rubbed my eyes. The phone was in my hand before I even realized I'd picked it up. Brandon answered on the second ring, his voice tight. "Hey." "Got a minute?" I asked. There was a pause. "Depends on what it's about." "The audit." Another pause, longer. "We went through all of it, cleaned it up." "You missed a few spots," I said. He sighed. "I trusted someone under me. He'd been there 5 years. We didn't catch it right away." "That's not the same as fixed," I said. "That's ignored." I didn't ignore it. "You're defending it." "No," he said, sharper now. "I'm trying to keep this from blowing up. There's a difference." I let the silence answer him. He spoke again, quieter. "Look, I didn't sign off on those entries personally. I delegated, then your name's still on it." His breath caught just slightly. "What are you going to do?" "I haven't decided yet." "I need time." "You had time." I hung up before he could respond, not out of anger, just necessity. Any more words would have diluted what had already been said. I turned back to the screen, opened a new document, began the memo. Subject: Potential reporting irregularities. Maynard and Company overview. Preliminary review indicates 4 entries across 3 projects that appear non-compliant with standard reporting protocol. I kept it clean, factual, no editorializing, no emotion. By the time I finished, the rain had stopped. The quiet felt less like peace and more like the moment right before you hear glass crack. I didn't hit send. Not yet. Instead, I read it again, all the way through. Then I read it backwards, paragraph by paragraph, a trick they taught us in ops training to check for bias. It held up. My inbox pinged. New message from Harold Pennington. Subject: Memo need to meet in person tomorrow. I leaned back in the chair. Family loyalty is heavy, but sometimes the truth weighs more. He didn't say hello. He said, "Let's talk like men." I stood at the doorway to his office, half lit by the amber glow of a desk lamp and a skyline that didn't care who was winning the argument inside. The blinds were halfway closed. The whiskey glass on his desk was full but untouched. Just like always. Show, not substance. Victor Maynard, CEO, father, gatekeeper of all things Maynard legacy, gestured toward the leather chair across from him. It creaked slightly as I sat. "I've read the memo," he said. "Harold forwarded it." I nodded. "It's not official yet." He exhaled, slow. "Then let's keep it that way, at least for now." There was a pause. I didn't fill it. He leaned forward, folding his hands together like someone preparing a deal sheet. "We can fix this." Quietly, internally, the guy Brandon trusted, he's already on his way out. We tighten the books, restructure the department, and move forward. I waited. "We don't need headlines, not with investors watching," he added, "and certainly not with our name tied to military review boards." Still, I said nothing. Victor narrowed his eyes. "Colin, I'm not dismissing your role here. I'm offering you something permanent." I raised an eyebrow. "A seat on the board, officially. You'd be part of the family business again, publicly, with the respect that comes with it." I let that hang in the air. Then I asked, "Is this about fixing the problem or hiding it better?" He didn't blink. "It's about survival. We can't afford this going public. The market's too sensitive, the press too hungry. Brandon's just getting his footing. Elaine's barely sleeping." I leaned back in the chair. Let the room settle around me. You once told me legacy isn't earned, I said. It's past. You still believe that? I built this, he said. From scratch. With your mother. With every minute I wasn't home. That's what Brandon's inheriting. I nodded slowly. And what about me? You left, he said. You chose something else. No, I said. I chose something you didn't control. That's not the same. His jaw clenched. I don't want to ruin the company, I said, but I won't protect it at the expense of what's right. We can't survive this going public, he repeated, more urgently now. I stood. Then maybe you shouldn't be the ones leading it. His eyes flared just slightly. Then he looked away. You'd throw your own family under the bus. No, I said. I'm trying to stop us from being run over. I walked toward the door. I'm giving you a chance, he said, voice low. I turned. And I'm giving you the truth. What you do with it is yours to own. Then I walked out. Not with anger. Not with victory. Just with the kind of clarity that comes when you realize saying no isn't about rebellion. It's about release. Back in my apartment, I sat in front of the laptop again. The memo was still there. Cursor blinking like it had all the time in the world. But I still hadn't hit send. Everyone else ran ahead. I stayed still. And maybe that was the loudest move I ever made. It was late. The kind of late where the streets didn't echo because they weren't empty enough. Just quiet. Still breathing. I walked without thinking, past the corner store that used to sell frozen Cokes for 50 cents, past the streetlight that used to flicker like it had secrets to keep. I ended up at the old baseball park. The bleachers were rusted in spots. The chain-link fence sagged near the third base line. Someone had left a batting glove behind on the dugout bench, damp and curled. Brandon and I used to come here every Saturday. He'd bring the bat. I brought snacks. We'd talk about who we wanted to be. He always said CEO like it was a birthright. I said I wasn't sure yet, but I liked maps and quiet and things that worked even when no one looked at them. I sat on the top row of the bleachers, let the cool night air wrap around me. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once, then nothing. Teddy met me at a corner coffee shop an hour later. No text, no plan. Just a nod we'd made years ago, when the world still felt like a thing we could draw with crayons. He looked older than the last time I saw him, but in a way that felt earned. His beard had gray now. His jacket looked too thin for the weather, but he didn't mention it. We didn't hug. We just sat, each with a black coffee, no cream, no sugar. How's your brother? He asked. I exhaled. Trying. He smiled. That's new. I nodded. It is. We sat in silence for a while. The clink of cups, the soft shuffle of a barista cleaning the counter. You ever regret not taking the offer from your dad? He asked. Every now and then, I said. But I regret less not being someone I'd hate in the mirror. Teddy laughed softly. That sounds like you. I stared at the steam rising from the cup. Do you ever feel like standing still wasn't the coward's move, but the only one that made sense? He leaned back. You don't need to catch up if you were never behind. That line stuck with me as I walked home. Back in the apartment, the city lights blinked like low heartbeats through my blinds. My uniform hung where I left it, clean, pressed, ready. But tonight, it wasn't the uniform I looked at. It was the memo, still there on the screen, unsigned, waiting. I read it one last time. It didn't feel like betrayal. It felt like breath. Finally exhaled. I clicked send. No fireworks, no shaking hands. Just a little silence that felt more honest than most of the words I'd heard in the last week. I picked up my phone, typed out a message. Brandon, I sent it. You needed the truth. So did I. Sometimes the hardest part of integrity isn't being right. It's being right when no one thanks you for it. The room wasn't angry. It was disappointed, which somehow felt worse. We sat around a long table that looked like it had been polished more times than spoken over. The blinds on the glass walls were half drawn. Outside, sunlight bounced off the steel and glass of the neighboring towers. Inside, the air felt filtered. Too clean. Too intentional. Brandon sat at the head of the table. His suit was perfect, his tie aligned, but his eyes were quieter than I'd ever seen them. Not dead, just tired. Harold sat near the center, his tablet open but untouched. He didn't lean forward. He didn't lean back. He just waited. That was his power. I was at the far end, not quite in shadow, but not in the spotlight either, where I preferred to be. Victor hadn't spoken yet. A few other board members sat stiff in their chairs, flipping through printouts they'd already read twice. Not out of confusion, just to avoid having to look up. Harold finally broke the silence. "Let's begin." Brandon cleared his throat. "I reviewed the flagged entries," he said, voice steady. "I didn't approve them personally, but I didn't catch them either. That's on me." No dramatics, no qualifying, just a plain admission. That mattered. "I trusted too fast," he added. "Delegated too loosely. I thought I had the right people in the right seats. I was wrong." There were no sighs of relief, just notepads being tapped lightly by pens. "I accept responsibility," he said, "and whatever comes with it." Harold glanced down, then back up. "The audit will continue. External teams will finish what you started. But we're not removing you." Brandon blinked, unsure if he'd heard right. "You'll restructure your division," Harold said. "Every leadership role reviewed, budget oversight realigned, and you'll work directly with a senior advisor, someone outside this company with no internal loyalties." His eyes flicked toward me. I didn't nod. I didn't smile. Brandon breathed in, let it sit for a beat. "Colin?" Harold nodded. "If he agrees." All heads turned toward me. "I'll help," I said, "but not to protect anyone, just to protect the work." Brandon looked down at his hands. "That's all I'm asking." Victor shifted in his seat. His cufflink caught the light. "This feels excessive," he said. Harold didn't look at him. "This isn't about titles anymore." Victor leaned back, exhaling through his nose. "It never should have been." Harold clicked his pen once. "Then it won't be moving forward." The meeting moved quickly after that. Action items, follow-ups, silent agreement that reputations would be handled with delicacy, but not dishonesty. As the chairs scraped back and people filed out, I stayed behind a moment. Let Brandon walk ahead. Watched the way he didn't reach for his phone, the way his shoulders stayed level. Not because he was unshaken, but because he'd learned to carry the weight without folding. Outside, the elevator lights blinked their countdown. Victor stood near the far wall, arms crossed. We caught each other's eyes. He didn't speak. He nodded. That was all. Respect can't be demanded. It can only be reclaimed moment by quiet moment. He didn't apologize. He handed me a pen, and that said enough. The rooftop garden at Maynard HQ wasn't large, but it had a view, the kind that made men feel important. That day it was quiet. No catered lunches, no executives checking stock tickers between bites of arugula. Just me and Victor. He stood near the railing, hands in his pockets, eyes on the skyline. The wind pushed gently against his coat. It was the first time I'd seen him outdoors without his suit jacket buttoned. "I used to come up here when I needed to think," he said without turning, "before we had 10 floors, before we had expectations." I didn't answer right away, just walked over and stood beside him, a few feet of space between us, enough for air, not tension. "I asked Harold to step back," he said. "Said I wanted 5 minutes, no notes, no company voice." I nodded. "I don't want to undo anything," he added. Not here to spin, just to speak. That part surprised me. He reached into his coat and pulled out a pen. Not just any pen, the one I remembered from his desk since I was a kid. Silver. Slightly scratched near the clip. It had his initials engraved near the base. VHM. He held it out. This isn't a gift, he said. It's not ceremonial. It's not symbolic. It's just a gesture. I took it. Slowly. It felt heavier than it looked. Victor looked back at the skyline. You never wanted the empire, he said. But you earned more than I gave you. He wasn't good at these moments. He never had been. Every sentence sounded like it had been ironed flat before use. I underestimated you, he continued, not because I didn't think you were capable, but because I couldn't picture a version of success I didn't invent. I stared at the pen, ran my thumb over the initials. I thought I was protecting the legacy, he said, but maybe I was just protecting control. I looked at him. This doesn't fix it, I said, but it's a start. He nodded once, just once. Then looked back toward the city like it might offer him a better ending. We didn't hug, we didn't shake hands. That wasn't our way. But we stood there a while longer, quiet, without filling the space with noise that didn't belong. Sometimes respect doesn't arrive with applause. Sometimes it just appears. That evening, I walked back into my apartment and found a small package on the table inside the door. Brown paper. No logo. My name written in handwriting I hadn't seen on a label in years. Mom's. I didn't open it right away. Just sat with it a moment. We don't always forgive for them. Sometimes we do it so we can stop carrying the weight. The pie smelled like apples and apology. It sat on the counter beside the old window with the peeling paint and the view of the garden that hadn't been tended since before Brandon's wedding. The crust was golden, slightly uneven on one edge, like her hands had shaken when she crimped it. That made it better somehow. More real. She didn't say much when I walked in. Just pointed to the chair at the small round table in the corner, the one where I used to do math homework and eat grilled cheese with too much mustard. Sinatra played low from the kitchen radio. The way you look tonight, soft and familiar. She served a slice without asking. No whipped cream, just the way I'd always liked it. Warm, simple, a little messy. I took a bite. Cinnamon, just enough tart. The kind of flavor that made you feel like maybe the past wasn't so far away after all. She sat across from me, hands folded on the table, watching the steam rise from her tea. I always meant to learn how to make crust properly, she said quietly, but you never complained. I liked it this way, I said. She nodded, but her eyes stayed on her cup. After a few minutes, she stood, walked to the drawer by the sink, and pulled something out. A small frame, wrapped in a kitchen towel. She placed it in front of me. The photo was one I hadn't seen in years. Me in dress uniform, standing next to a NATO flag, a general's hand on my shoulder, the medal freshly pinned. My expression in the photo was sharp, but not proud. More present. Like I knew it mattered, but not for the reason others thought. I kept it in my Bible, she said, not because I was hiding it, but because it didn't feel right next to the others. The others meant Brandon's MBA diploma, Victor's Forbes feature, the photo of the company's IPO bell. Why now? I asked. She shrugged. Because you finally looked like you could let me. I held the frame in both hands. It was warm from the towel, or maybe from her. I didn't know. I'm sorry I didn't push harder, she said. Back then. You were doing your own balancing act, I replied. I never expected you to fight every battle." She smiled, barely. "But I should have fought at least one." We sat in silence again. Not the kind that comes from distance, but the kind that builds a bridge, quietly, beam by beam. I stood, photo still in hand, and looked toward the living room. Framed photos in perfect symmetry, polished wood, magazine layout lighting. Then I looked at the kitchen wall. Slightly crooked clock, faded wallpaper, nail already sticking out just above the phone nook. "This space always felt like ours," I said. She said nothing as I walked over and hung the photo right there, beside the spice rack. When I turned back, her hands were pressed together near her lips, like she wasn't praying, but needed a reason to stay still. "I never stopped being proud of you, Colin," she said, "even when I didn't know how to show it." "I know," I said. That night back in Arlington, my phone buzzed. Brandon Thanksgiving. "You in? Not all wounds heal the same way. Some just stop hurting when you stop hiding them. The last time we built something together, it was Legos. Now it was trust." The conference room didn't look like a war zone, but it had all the signs. Whiteboards full of scribbles, 3-day-old coffee cups lining the windowsill, an empty pizza box balanced precariously on top of a recycling bin someone had clearly stopped aiming for. Brandon stood at the whiteboard, marker in hand, sleeves rolled up. He looked more like a graduate student mid-thesis than a chief financial officer rebuilding a broken wing. I sat across from him, laptop open, pen tapping rhythmically against the pad beside me. "I'm thinking of collapsing these two oversight chains into one," he said, drawing a quick arrow between departments. "Cuts down on redundancy." "Or clarity," I said. "You'll save 3 meetings a month, but risk 3 times the liability." He nodded, not defensive, just listening. "All right, so let's not collapse. Let's streamline reporting instead." "Better," I said. "Cleaner lines, less room for interpretation." A month ago, this would have been a fight. Now it was just a conversation. We didn't talk like brothers. We talked like 2 people who had finally stopped trying to prove who they were and started paying attention to what needed to be done. Brandon tossed the marker on the table. "You were right about that infrastructure line. It was buried, not malicious, just lazy. But lazy leads to disaster." I nodded. "I've seen disaster. This isn't it, but it was heading there." He sat down across from me, elbows on the table. "I used to think Dad's way was the only way to lead. Stand tall, talk big, never blink." "Sounds exhausting," I said. He chuckled. "It was. We reviewed more documents, outlined new compliance checks, argued once, softly, about a data access protocol. But even then, it was different. No ego, no one trying to win. Just work." An hour in, Harold walked in without knocking. He surveyed the room like someone checking a patient's vitals. Then he smiled, barely, but enough. "This is what leadership looks like," he said. "Messy, tired, productive." Brandon straightened in his chair, but didn't posture. "We've still got gaps to fill." "You will," Harold said. "You Maynards might make it yet." Then he left, as quickly as he came. Brandon looked at me. That actually meant something, didn't it? "It did," I said. We worked for another 2 hours. By the time we packed up, the room smelled like burnt coffee and dry erase ink. The whiteboard was full of arrows, brackets, and ideas that actually felt worth chasing. At the door, Brandon paused. "Hey, you got plans for Thanksgiving?" I shrugged. "Not yet." He smiled. "You should come." I didn't answer right away. Later that night, back in my apartment, I checked the calendar I never touched anymore. Thanksgiving was circled. I usually drew a line through it, an old habit, not this time. Working together doesn't erase the past, but it gives you something new to build from. The table looked smaller, but somehow it finally felt big enough for all of us. It was late afternoon, the kind of November light that wrapped itself around the house instead of shining through it. Outside, the trees had gone bare. Inside, the fire crackled like it had been waiting all day for someone to notice. Elaine had outdone herself. Turkey, stuffing, green bean casserole, even the cranberry sauce she usually said wasn't worth the effort. This year, it had orange zest in it. She smiled when I noticed. Brandon poured the wine. He didn't try to dominate the conversation. He asked people questions, listened when they answered, laughed the kind of laugh that didn't try to sell anything. Victor sat at the head of the table, as always, but he leaned back more now. Observed. Nodded more than he spoke. His tie was looser than I ever remembered. The conversation floated between memories, some polished, some awkward. Brandon joked about how I used to fake stomach aches to skip church. Elaine added that I once hid a full slice of pumpkin pie under my pillow because I didn't want to finish dinner first. Even Victor chuckled at that one. The air smelled like cinnamon, roasted garlic, and something else. Comfort, maybe. Or effort. Effort to show up. Effort to stay. Effort to try. As the plates cleared and second helpings slowed, Victor stood. No glass raised, just hands resting lightly on the edge of the table. "I don't usually make speeches outside a boardroom," he said, glancing around. "But I wanted to say this. To growth. Yours, mine, and ours." He didn't look directly at me, but he didn't avoid it either. I gave a small nod, raised my glass, clinked it gently against Elaine's. There was no thunderous applause, just soft acknowledgement. The kind that means more. After dessert, Elaine's pie, still just imperfect enough to be perfect. I walked into the hallway. That familiar corridor with its lined-up photographs, still glossy, still angled too precisely. But something had changed. Between Brandon's MBA photo and Victor's Forbes cover was mine. The NATO medal photo, the one Mom had kept hidden in her Bible. It wasn't in the kitchen anymore. It wasn't sacred or secret. It was simply included. I stood there for a moment, not to admire it, but to let it exist. Then, slowly, Victor walked past me. He paused, adjusted the frame, barely tilted, not to fix it, just to touch it. Then he kept walking. No words. None needed. That night, back in my apartment, I took off my watch and set it on the windowsill. No calendar to check. No count of days since the last phone call. No mental scorecard to update. Just space. Just stillness. Just enough. You don't need your family to understand you perfectly. You just need them to try, and this year they did. You know, looking back, I've learned that healing doesn't always come with closure. Sometimes it comes with showing up, even when you don't know if anyone's waiting. And respect, it's not always given by blood. Sometimes it's earned by standing still when everyone else is running in the wrong direction. We all carry something. A silence we inherited. A wound we weren't allowed to name. But here's the truth I've come to understand. You don't need everyone to understand your journey. Just enough room to walk it with your head held high. So I'll leave you with this. Forgiveness isn't a reward for the past. It's a gift we give ourselves for the future. Now, I'm curious. Have you ever forgiven someone who didn't ask for it? Or maybe you're still waiting for someone to see you, for who you really are. Drop a 1 in the comments if this story made you pause for a moment. Tell me, what part of the country are you listening from tonight? And if you've got a different take on this kind of family story, I'd love to hear it down below. And hey, if stories like this speak to something in you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. We've got more on the way. Thanks for sitting with me tonight. I'll see you in the next one. Take care, and be kind to the version of you that kept going.